Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, all the way from Sydney, Australia, where it is currently 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, so forgive me if I sound at less than my best. Apologies also if the cicadas drown out my voice at times. My topic today is wool innovations, the opportunities and challenges for wool and for American wool in particular. My agenda is simple. We're going to start with some of the challenges and then look at what is possible for wool, and in particular some innovations relevant to American wools. First of all, the challenges. We all know that wool has a whole bunch of positive eco-credentials. All you need is sunshine and rain to make feed for the sheep. Of course, you also need committed and dedicated wool growers to facilitate healthy livestock, undertake regenerative farming, etc. But sheep, they manage to grow a new fleece each year or even sooner. Wool's also biodegradable. We've buried wool garments along with synthetic ones, and in less than 12 months, no wool, only synthetic can be found. It also biodegrades in marine environments. Wool's been recycled now for nearly 2 centuries. Of course, nowadays rag sorting is in India and then spinning in India and Prato. All these positive eco-credentials are unfortunately under attack due to a couple of trends. Firstly, from footprint assessments. In the world today, there are more than 100. Some examples being the Higg MSI and product module, EU Eco Label, Blue Sign, Ecotex. These last three are mostly concerned with chemicals applied during growing and processing, but the Higg, or Worldly as it is now known, system is a full life cycle analysis tool. Coming to the apparel and footwear industry soon, though, is the EU's Product Environmental Footprint Methodology, or PEF. This is a life cycle analysis method for calculating the environmental impact of a product over its lifetime. This method covers 16 environmental impacts, including climate change and those related to water, air, resource use, land use, and toxicity. The general LCA methods are complemented with product or organization-specific calculation rules, which enable comparison of environmental performances between similar products and companies active in similar sectors. The objective of this PEF information is to seek a reduction of the environmental impact of goods and services, taking into consideration the end-to-end supply chain activities. Of course, any green claims will then need to be substantiated using these PEF category rules. And these PEF requirements will impact apparel brands trading in Europe, although the precise impacts are still to be finalised. Although voluntary from 2025, after Jan 2026, brands wishing to make green claims will have to be able to substantiate them via an EU recognised PEF methodology. So, what, if any, are the implications for wool? The main implications are associated with the bias towards synthetics because the system boundaries are not equal for synthetics and natural fibres. The land, the sun, energy and water to grow the plants needed to create oil millions of years ago cannot be measured, so have been ignored. Energy and water needs for natural fibres are not ignored. Thus, natural fibres such as wool look bad. Even bio-based synthetics, which are touted as eco-friendly, fare worse than their fossil fuel-based counterparts. The 16 impacts I mentioned earlier can be decreased if a product is used more times before it is disposed into landfill or incineration. And the PEF methodology attempts to predict the number of times a product is used from information about its toughness, its repairability, and the influence of commercial practices associated with fast fashion. Unfortunately, the PEF method favours really strong synthetic fibres and ignores most of wool's benefits, such as being used in more long-lived classic products, needing less cleaning, ready recyclability, and generally higher perceived value, leading to longer retention and higher likelihood of repair. So what, you may ask? Our wool is being sold to Americans in the USA. The problem is America's own Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is coordinating the current technical secretariat responsible for the PEF rules. You may already know the SAC and its ownership of the HIG or Worldly brands, and you'll also know many of the US brands who are members of the SAC. What you may not know is SAC's commitment to adopt the PEF category rules into their own system once it is legislated in the EU. Furthermore, the New York Fashion Act will also be based on the HIG, MSI and product module. You should also be aware that the current datasets used to calculate the PEF scores are out of date and do not really reflect modern wool growing methods. Now, the International Wool Textile Organization is working on this and is in the process of submitting more up-to-date data to the EC. In the meantime, what's my advice to you? Well, as wool growing accounts for at least 25% of a product's footprint, any reduction is forced to have an impact. Another trend of concern is the trend to reducing the chemical load for textiles. In the case of wool, my concern is regarding legacy chemicals. By this, I mean chemicals that were once 10 years or more ago freely applied during processing are no longer considered safe for the environment, or in some cases, safe for human beings. Examples include some pesticides, NPO detergents or surfactants used to clean and process textiles, sodium dichromate, which is often applied after dyeing to improve colour fastness, and then polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFASs, used to improve stain and water repellents. These have been banned or restricted under the EU's REACH regulations since 2012. The issue for wool, though, from 2025, the EU will introduce legislation to encourage the use of recycled fibre in textiles. Great news, because wool is easy to recycle. Indians and Italians have been doing it for centuries, and wool rags command a premium in this industry. But wool rags tend to have been around a long time, classic fashion and all that. And these can be contaminated with some of these legacy chemicals. Although the EC recognises this problem, it restricts exemption to 100% recycled products, and most recycled wool products need at least some virgin fibre to improve the strength of the recycled wool yarns. There's nothing much can be done regarding products manufactured more than a decade ago. We have to consider the future potential for recycled wool to be used in new products. And there is a potential for wool's clean green image to be forever tarnished if there will always be a potential risk and thus a need for expensive testing. The solution, the wool growing industries around the world and processing must stop using these banned chemicals, even if local legislation has not yet caught up to the EU's. In the meantime, we have to make sure that wool's value is maintained and even enhanced in the eyes of the brands and the consumers. And an example is by promoting wool's positive attributes and its relevance to today's consumer through innovation. Fortunately, we have the innovator's dream fibre, because wool is not a simple polymer like polyester or nylon. It is complex, especially on the outside. Like other animal fibres such as cashmere and angora, which have similar scale structures, and even human animals are the same. You can check this yourself by rubbing your fingers up and down your own hair and feel the change in friction due to the scales. Other fibres, such as cotton and synthetics, do not have or even need scales. Wool is also complex on the inside. And in this simplified diagram, you can see that there are several components, right down to the spiral DNA-like structure of its molecules. What does all this mean? Let's start with the scales on the outside. I've spent most of my technology life trying to prevent shrinkage in washing, but I have to admit it can be quite useful to deliberately shrink a garment because it creates texture and density, which in turn impart a more relaxed or casual aspect to a garment. You might know this as boiled wool, which has better wind resistance and warmth than normal knits. More innovative is to mix shrink resist or easy care yarns with normal wool yarns, which shrink if you get enhanced texture and a softness not normally found in boiled wool. You don't just have to mix yarns. You can also get mottled effects by creating random patches of felting and non-felting along the length of yarn when knitted, and when it's washed it creates patches of boiled wool and patches of normal wool. Again, we get a more relaxed look and feel to a wool garment. The process is one of printing the yarn, but if you want less random effects, you can even print a garment with a pattern of felting and non-felting areas. This is a unique attribute of wool. Staying with the scales, they can be modified to make them thinner and therefore the fibre smoother. When you do that, the fibre starts to feel like cashmere and look like silk. Two fibres synonymous with luxury. We call this mercerized wool, which gives us additional softness and therefore luxury. Next to skin comfort, because the process makes the fibre less prickly, and machine washability, because the scales, which are the cause of shrinkage in washing, the technical term is felting, are no longer prominent enough to have an effect. So in one process, we have addressed two of the main barriers to using wool: itchy scratchiness and difficult to care for, both gone. A fourth effect is to enhance the richness and the vibrancy of the fabric when it is dyed. And this process has been used to treat annually more than 20 million pounds of wool in China. Fortunately, the American sheep industry has invested in the equipment to carry out the process, and the technology is available at US Wools. I mentioned DNA earlier because it allows the fibre to stretch and recover. This gives us another innovation called Optim, a technology currently only available from China, but I mention it because it is an example of how you can enhance wind and rain resistance and easy care without using any chemicals in the process. So, what's the potential for innovating with American wools? Well, one of American wool's key attributes is crimp. So we can have bulk without weight, and trapped still air in a wool filling creates warmth without clamminess and thus maintains comfort in cooler conditions. A good example is the quilted coat, which relies on trapped still air for warmth. Normally, we use feather and down or polyester to achieve this, but down is useless when wet and polyester is excellent until you actually get hot. Wool's ideal because it suffers none of these drawbacks. Looking beyond apparel during my research for this presentation, I came across some more unusual innovations in wool. This innovation from a company called Solid Wool, which takes relatively coarse or low value wools, mixes them with a bio-based resin, which can then be injection molded into sheet form or even into a moldable form, in this case a chair seat. Another non-apparel innovation comes in the form of wool pots. The wool being a natural slug and snail repellent, the pots enhance moisture management as you'd expect, and they last a long time before biodegrading into plant food. And finally, because we're running out of time, I want to show you an innovative use of wool's natural felting capacity: machine dryer balls from 100% wool roving. They're about 3 inches in diameter and you need 3 to 6 of them depending on the dryer load and size. They help to separate the garments during drying and thus increase fluffiness. They can also be infused with a fragrance and be made from traceable or breed-specific wools. So, to conclude, I have alerted you to some important trends potentially impacting the wool business. I've explained why wool is an innovator's dream fibre and given you a few examples of why and how American wools can be enhanced. I'm available online now, ready to take any questions. In the meantime, thank you for listening.